Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another uLaw webinar. And today's webinar has been accredited for actually 1.5 hours of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, and it's 1 hour of CPD credits across British Columbia and New Brunswick. So you are able to log into your individual Law Society portals and use the title Everything Practice Management. Of course, the session runs for an hour, but in Ontario, because of this, the content itself, it's been accredited for 1.5 hours. I kindly request you to mute your phone lines, ask any questions that you may have at any given time during the session using the chat window. And once again, I confirm that today's session is accredited for professionalism CPD credits that you're able to utilize within your individual provinces. Okay. So, like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has a specific agenda that we have to cover. We're going to talk about we've broken it down into the 7 professional obligations that you as a legal professional in this business have to keep in mind, to build a discipline around and manage as you run your practice and your business. Okay, so this has been taken out of the bookkeeping guidelines started off as the Law Society of Upper Canada, which became Law Society of Ontario, and then we've taken the bookkeeping guidelines across other provinces to condense it into this particular presentation that takes best of breed feedback provided and kind of really taken the high-level aspects and grouped it under these 7 different categories, if you will. So, for example, we've started with what do you have to keep in mind when you're considering client intake, service, and communication channels to correspond and represent the company with your client, your prospective clients, existing clients, etc. Things to keep in mind when you're managing your files or your matters, important compliance components that need to be part of it. We also talk about aspects of best practices that you may want to keep in mind when managing files, such as ensuring that it's cross-indexed, it's easy to search. Depending on the kind of system that you have, you are now able to tweak these systems to hopefully adhere to some of these best practices, improve on it. And then we'll move on to the financial management, the really crux of many of the audits in terms of your general ledgers, the journals, the reconciliation reports, and all of the other financial documents also from a business management standpoint that you may otherwise have to manage, which kind of leads itself, if you will, to the business management aspects of it. How do you ensure that you've got your website going, you're completely ready to run the business, ensuring that you have your bank accounts opened, determining whether a trust or a general account makes sense for your business. We'll talk about the important software, hardware that you may have to consider when you open this business. If you're looking to rent spaces, of course, you have a lot of options today. Rather than have to rent it by yourself, you can co-rent or co-share a location, so you have other options today as a business professional as well. So we'll talk briefly about that. Professional management, of course, you're here to not only understand and learn about what we have to say in terms of practice management, but of course there's professionalism and there's other credits that you have to earn through the duration of the year so that you're up to date with those important obligations that you have. So we'll talk about that. Time management and personal management, believe it or not, a lot of the bookkeeping guideline talks about is how you as a legal professional can ensure that you have the right tools, the right techniques, and the tools available in today's marketplace, or when it was written, it was based on the tools and techniques that was available then. But of course, there's advent of technology has improvised all that tremendously, right? So how do you maximize the use of the tools, techniques, and the discipline to manage time so that you can spend more time towards what you can do best? You're not overwhelmed by the volume of your business where you're actually not managing time properly to the point where you're unable to serve your client in a professional manner. So that's really what they talk about, right? And then personal management, how do you then take some of the time off to ensure that you're building a bit of that personality, ensuring that you're happy, comfortable doing what you're doing, and you're not burning yourself during the process of being that legal professional. So we'll talk briefly about these 7 different aspects or obligations to yourself and back to the society, as well as the law societies that you represent. Okay? And we'll kind of take a deeper dive, if you will, looking at each of these aspects one at a time. So what we've done is we've taken and broken it down into consumable portions, best practices, things to keep in mind across these subject areas. So once again, for those who just joined us, today's webinar has been accredited for 1.5 hours of CPD credits in the province of Ontario. It's 1 hour in the province of British Columbia and New Brunswick. And the title is Everything Practice Management. Okay? So one of the first aspects we want to cover under the professional obligations is that of the client intake, service, and communication. Really is your first step in the whole engagement with that customer and taking that customer through the whole experience of what it is to work with your legal firm. Okay, so we talk about client intake. One of the most important aspects that the Law Society talks about is being a legal professional. They anticipate that you have a process along the way to capture a detailed recording of all the calls and consultations that you provide. Now, these consultations could be pro bono, where it's free of charge. It could be a stipulated time. It could be a 30 minutes free consultation. This could be a billable time where you're actually being paid for it. Regardless, it's very important that you have a process, a technique, or a tool, or a combination of these 3 to be able to capture the moment and capture the details of what's spoken as well as what's being corresponded. Okay, whether that's text, email, phone calls, ensuring that you have that technique and process in place. This starts with getting the customer's information, first name, last name, or if it's a company that you're working with, the business name of the company, their physical address if there is one. If there isn't one, then of course then there's a party that needs to be involved who you would have to invoice or correspond with. In cases of legal aid and matters of that nature. If you have information about the phone number or website, etc., whatever information that you've been able to capture from the customer, it's important that you do record that information into a system or a record-keeping system or a legal accounting system, practice management system, etc. Okay? Now, once you've saved that basic information of the customer, assuming that there's a couple of ways in which that initial intake can then proceed further, right? Either the customer is going to engage you, retain you, or engage you in that file or in that matter, and in which case, let's assume the positivity of that is, let's say the customer has given you that information and they want to proceed with retaining you, and you have a retainer letter in place and all of that, and if you're really interested in moving forward with the file, one of the important aspects or steps that the Law Society recommends that you as a legal professional do is ensure that you have a conflict screening done. Okay, so you're ensuring that in taking that client, comparing them with the database that you already have of existing customers that you've dealt with, as well as other parties that you've come across in your legal life, that this new client, there is no conflict in representing him, her, or the company itself. Okay, so whether that's a database that you manage, again, a legal accounting practice management system that you have, or if it's a simplistic Excel sheet that you use to quickly search and find information, whatever works best for you to save you time, money, and the effort to do it fast and seamless, you want to consider that as an option. But keep in mind that conflict screening is an important aspect of that entire client intake, service, and communication, right? And once you've done that, you've determined that it's completely okay, there's no non-compliance, or there is no conflict in representing the client, the Law Society highly recommends that you be very as open as possible and as articulate as possible in a legal document, as a retainer letter or as an engagement letter, outlining the roles and responsibilities of both yourself or your legal firm, your law firm, as well as the roles and responsibilities of the client in that engagement, and including, of course, the fee structure or the collateral for fees, including the retainer agreement. What would be the retainer if there is one? If there isn't, then what is the fee for the engagement? How do you charge for disbursements? Do you charge, for different types of disbursements depending on the areas of practice, right? So ensuring that you have, again, a template. Could be as simple as just having a Word document that's templatized, or using, again, systems that already have these samples or templates, making it easier for you to articulate the collateral for fees, which may vary based on areas of practice. So for, let's say, a small claims, this could be a flat fee. For a criminal law, maybe this is a flat fee or a contingency fee. Whereas if it's a family or if it's something else, it could be billable time. For, wills, it could be a flat fee. It could be a mixture of billable time and flat fee for other types of small claims. So it really comes down to your experience, where you're ensuring that certain types of dockets mean certain types of billable aspect to it, or the entire matter itself. So determining what that is. And once you've created that file, so moving along after the client intake and you've communicated the service level agreement, is really moving along, again, going down that positive path of, let's assume you've got that retainer letter signed and you agreed upon a $1,000 retainer, or, then you're obligated, of course, to deposit that retainer payment, whether that's paid through a credit card or if it's paid through a check, Interact, whatever means that you accept payments into your trust account, that retainer is actually deposited into a trust account. Now, the Law Society does allow you to capture retainers or accept retainers up to $7,500 in cash. And if you do accept cash retainers, then, of course, you have the obligation of depositing that cash no later than 24 hours from when you received it. Okay? So that's another important aspect that, especially if you're dealing with the retainers, that you keep in mind, that you do have to deposit that into your trust account. And the last but not the least, something that's often not considered, is ensuring that you're providing that customer a receipt for that payment. Okay, very important to safeguard your interest and the customer's interest, and ensuring that there's a actual record keeping of that payment. And then, of course, then you're going to go down the path of ensuring that you're doing what you do best as a legal professional to win that case or fight that case for your client. So that's really a positive workflow, if you will, of taking customer, getting their information, ensuring that there are no conflicts in representing the client, ensuring that you've clearly articulated through a retainer or an engagement letter the responsibilities, the collateral for fees, etc., ensuring that if there is a retainer involved, most definitely depositing that into your trust account and providing a receipt, and then moving forward with, the day-to-day tasks of managing that file to closure, right? Now, let's consider that the person did give you that information, and there's other aspects of it. There's one is whether they gave the information, you started the file, but then for whatever reason, the client comes back and non-engages. Even if they provided you a retainer, and if they do not engage, and if you've really not done anything with that file, then you sometimes you may have to just provide that retainer back. Okay, it's a refund of the retainer. Or it could be a situation where even before getting started, the person gives you information, but then says, I'm not interested in proceeding with that small claims matter. Then it's, for both these instances, whenever there's a reason for non-engagement, either from yourself as a legal firm or from the client's side, it's still an important aspect for you to have a template ready or use templates available in systems to provide a non-engagement letter to that client who had given you all that information. The non-engagement letter stating that you as the legal professional or your firm is no longer responsible for managing that legal file, because as on this particular date and time, we had corresponded that either you or the legal firm has determined a non-engagement. Very important, as subtle as it may seem, because many times we've heard of stories where it was just agreed upon, and then for whatever reason the customer misunderstood. They still thought that the legal firm was responsible, right? It kind of leads to some of that gray area if you don't have something written, signed, and agreed upon. Okay, really important, providing non-engagement letters as a logical closure to any correspondence and relationship that you established with a client. Okay. Fantastic. I already have a question. I love it. The question is about a ghost client. Okay, so it's of course, a really nice nomenclature. A ghost client is a situation, from what I understand, is where someone gives you their contact information, address, right? And then it's basically said that, all right, let me get back to you with what my thoughts are. Here's some information. I'm still thinking about this. I might have to call you back next week to start a retainer agreement. And then they do that, weeks pass by, and then they, of course, never come back. Then you as a legal professional may want to mark that prospective client, it's just a status to a ghost client, because, of course, going with the term ghost, it just disappeared. But at the same time, if you do have a correspondence address or some means of corresponding, recommending a clear letter stating that they had given you this information, but the minimum or the maximum time period that you would, as a policy set up for your firm, has passed, and hence you're non-engaging them, and really relieving yourself of any obligation of having to deal with that legal file. So that's really a ghost client situation. And we wanted to highlight some of the documents, some of the templates we spoke about, things that you want to keep in mind as you proceed through the whole client intake, service, and communication. Okay, and we wanted to start with one of the most important documents in that initial engagement, which is a retainer letter. Now you can convert this, of course, into an engagement letter. The big difference being, of course, the retainer is where there's money involved, with a retainer involved and a trust account involved. With an engagement letter, of course, there's no upfront retainer. It's basically stating everything else except that the payment of the fees is done after the fact, whereas in the retainer it's in advance and then it's withdrawn from trust based on eligibility, right? But some of the important aspects that you want to keep in mind in that initial letter that you share with your client is the nature and scope of the matter, right? This is, a small claims matter that I'm going to be representing in the small claims court. This is a criminal matter. The parties involved, what was the nature of what's happened, etc. The responsibilities of the client. We spoke about this briefly before. Not only is it important for you to articulate the roles and responsibilities of your legal firm, the work that you've done, etc., it's very important for you to articulate what you expect as the responsibility of the client. A good example would be that you expect as a firm to have payments done within, let's say, 30 days. So from the time they accept an invoice, they have 30 days, for example, to make a payment, or it could be net 15, net 7, really depending on what you agree upon in this particular document that both parties sign. So responsibilities could be that. Responsibilities could also be with regards to correspondence. So maybe you have a policy that you expect the client to respond back via email, text, within a stipulated time period. So let's say you send an email, you expect a response back within 2 days or 3 days. If they don't, of course, then you have to highlight that was an accepted responsibility that they're not adhering to. Scheduling and course of representation, right? So ensuring that you articulate based on the nature of this file, how often you're going to be scheduling time. If you're going to be at court, what does that look like? Do you have the responsibility of having the client to show up there so that then you have reminders, ensuring that they are aware of that situation, things of that nature. The method and frequency of communication, we talk about this in many of our webinars. Depending on the nature of the matter, again, You may decide to correspond on daily, weekly, monthly basis. And the modes of correspondence is something that you may want to talk about too, with this, whether that's email, electronic correspondence, which has become a, an important aspect of communication in today's day and age, or if you're just going to be sending letters via mail, then establishing that protocol is important so that you're setting the expectations right. As simple as even an invoice, ensuring that you, based on again the nature of the beast, in this retainer agreement may sign up to saying that you will invoice as and when a docket or a disbursement has been completed, or you may agree upon a retainer letter where you sign up for a monthly invoice if you're working with certain businesses that you're retained by, right? So that's really what the retainer arrangement comes down to. So really stating that this is what the initial retainer is, and if there's a top-up that's required, again, based on the nature of the file, then you want to clearly articulate that, because you don't want to surprise the client with a new retainer payment request or a top-up, something that's not already been agreed upon in this document. So really try to ensure that through this document that all parties are clear of what they should expect in this relationship. Okay. Termination details, similar to the non-engagement, that if there is a certain repetition of responsibilities missed, then you as the legal firm have the opportunity to terminate, likewise giving the client the opportunity to terminate within a time period, and then of course drawing the boundaries as best determined by the policies of your firm. Okay. Talk about the client confidentiality, and of course we spoke about this, the risks. Sometimes you may want to articulate the risks associated with certain methods of communication. Electronic means, emails, text, even mails. Sometimes if there's a strike, of course the mail is not going to reach them in time. That's a risk as well, right? So ensuring that some of these key aspects are considered as you either design or define a new document, or if you're looking to tweak on an existing document that you already have. Okay. We'll kind of move along into the next aspect of the professional obligation. So we did the client intake, service, and communication. We'll move on to the next phase of that, that life, which is the file management. So the Law Society does talk briefly about some best practices in terms of things to consider when you're managing files or matters. Okay. Having a checklist, of course, of important documents that have to be in the file to actually move along representation. So some law firms may actually have a checklist which says, do I have a retainer letter signed? Do I have a retainer receipt showing proof of that retainer agreed and paid for? Things of that nature. Do you have, before getting started, the conflict check done? Do you have a client ID verification document? Do you have a scanned copy of the driver's license or passport of the client, etc.? The incorporation documents in some cases, depending on the nature. So that's a simple checklist that you may want to manage and maintain, depending, again, on the firm's policies, but that's something that we've seen across firms as well. In terms of the file management, the numbering, how do you manage that? As trivial as it sometimes sounds, you want to plan for the success of your firm over, multiple years. Of course, when you just get started, you're really going to come up with a simple year-based numbering system. But as your firm grows, and as you have multiple individuals being part of it, you're going to start to see how that number can quickly run over. So you want to have not only a system to manage files, separate those files based on each and every individual matter, not base it on the client, because you could have multiple matters with various natures of scope, the same client. So very important that you have a file numbering system as well as a system in place to demarcate individual files, even if it's meant for the same client. Okay, so for example, a good example is the file number being unique, so that no two file numbers are the same. The file numbers be cross-indexed. And what that really means is that if you're looking for checking conflicts, that you are able to index and search for all the files that were related to that conflict search. Okay, so if you've dealt with a previous matter that has James Smith on it, that those matters are cross-indexed so that they can be easily referred to in that search. Ensuring that they're chronologically arranged so that it's easy for you to search either by first name, last name, by just an alphabet, by file number, by description, by date, whatever is the chronological way and you want to search for that information, make it simpler and easier for you to do that. You could have an Excel sheet which has all the filters on it, makes it simpler and easier for you to search. You could have a practice management software. In today's day and age, you have systems that come with search features as an inbuilt functionality. It's no more rocket science. But taking advantage of those features is something that you want to keep in mind. Because not only helps that with search, it helps with organization as well as with conflict checks. Okay. The record keeping of any client interactions. That's another very important aspect, whether that's email, mail correspondences that can be scanned in. I haven't heard too many of text being prevalent, but slowly but surely we're starting to see that take precedence in legal firms today, especially if you're confirming appointments. You have systems that send out text messages today, like almost like your dentist's office, confirming an appointment to meet at this place or at the courthouse, etc. So that's starting to slowly but surely be part of that correspondence channel. Okay. And then, of course, we spoke about ensuring that the files are properly organized through a numeric and cross-index format. And before I jump into financial management, of course, this was a question in a previous webinar as well, is do I have come up with my own file numbering system, or do I use a system in place to do that? The immediate quick answer that we like to give is, again, depending on the number of files that you have in a year or across your business. If you're just going to be doing 2 to 5 matters or even less than that a month, sometimes it just helps to have your own numbering system, because you can just say 2019. But even still, consider all these factors, ensuring that you come up with a file numbering system and a file management system that makes sense across all these boundaries. But if you don't want the headache of having to, again, deal with yet another attribute, then it's just safer to use this system's file numbering formatting, if you will. But then you also have systems that have their own file numbering format, but also allow you to include your file number in it. So do consider your options based on what your particular firm's needs are, and consider one of these 3 routes. So there's no right or wrong to it. It really comes down to your situational need. But there are tools out there that can accommodate all those different needs. Okay, so financial management, it really starts from the get-go of the intake when you actually sign that retainer letter, and when you talk about the financial aspects of this business relationship. Yeah. The proper fee scheduling of the type of billability that you're going to sign up this client for, very important aspect of financial management of your legal firm, right? Because there's 2 main components, of course, of any business, and the legal business is no different from that. You're going to have revenue, and then you're going to have expenses. And as a legal business, that's going to correspond to or add up to your profit or loss. And of course, you're going to pay taxes based on the profit, right? A certain percentage on the profit that you make that year. Now, let's say that's the simple math behind all of this that we're doing. From a financial management, you of course have the responsibility of dealing with the revenue. And the revenue comes through 2 different streams, 1 or 2 different types of streams. One is through a retainer agreement that has money settling into your trust account, which is untouched till you've put the effort and invoiced, and then you can move the money from the trust account into your general account. Okay, once it does come into your general account, then it's your revenue recognized or realized. Or it could be the other means where there is no trust involved, and then there's just payment coming directly into your general account after you've generated an invoice. Okay, so for both these streams, you of course want to consider how you want to charge your client. Are you going to charge them flat fees, billable time, a mixture of both? We spoke about that. Is it HST included, or, jurisdictional taxes included or not included? Are you going to charge them for disbursements like travel time, mileage, photocopies, etc., or is that included? So if there's an all-inclusive fee, there's one approach of approaching today's market, being competitive and trying to set yourself aside from a pricing standpoint. Or, depending on the nature of the business, you of course are going to charge for each and everything because it's necessary. Nothing is right or wrong. I mean, everything is really right based on what's best for your firm, and you can always tweak that. And that's the best part of running a business, is you have the opportunity to tweak it and try it out, all within the boundaries of the obligations that you have, right? The ethics and the legal obligations that you have. But it's important that you do have that financial structure in place for each and every client and each and every file for that client. Now, once you've docketed and once you agreed upon this, and then you start to docket your time, you disperse the effort of the fees or the disbursements, etc., it's also important, as per agreement, that you send the invoices in time. Because that's one thing that you don't want to slack at your end from a law firm or a legal firm's perspective. Ensure that there's a process. Again, we speak about process, technique, tools to either remind you to do it manually or automate it through a system that can do it automatically for you. Because that's important, because that's a trigger point for the money to be recognized as revenue, whether that's general payment or whether that's opening up the eligible trust amount that has to be moved from trust into general. Right? So the invoice is a very key document in your legal life to ensure that you've earned that revenue for your firm. Okay? So based on the retainer engagement letter, please make it a point, if it's not already in the process, to ensure you send that to your client. Because that's when you've earned the right to, of course, earn that revenue. Once you have sent that invoice, of course, having a system in place, and again, this is quote-unquote bookkeeping software, bread and butter of what they do, ensuring that you have the right record keeping or the reports that tell you about any slippages in payments. So if someone has passed the net 30, of course you want to understand what the days on sale are, have a reminder to call them or send them an email asking them for that payment. Okay? Sometimes it could be where there's money sitting in trust and you haven't, for whatever reason, haven't moved that money from trust to general. This reminder or this report can actually help you make money by just moving that eligible trust account money from trust to general. Again, we talk about the record keeping of the general accounts through the general receipts and disbursements. And from a financial management perspective, the other aspect we spoke about, all this is related to is the revenue. So docketing, dispersing, generating invoices, and transferring funds is all part of where you accept, and it's part of your revenue. We also talk about the other side of the business where you pay for business expenses, etc. So that's where it's very important that you manage those expenses. You manage not only in terms of ensuring that you're inputting those expenses so that they can be tracked. They can first be recorded so that they can be tracked, and if they're tracked, of course, then can be measured, and then you can make smart decisions about what you get out of that data. So from that perspective, maintaining your bank statements, maintaining any canceled checks, and duplicate deposit slips, all the payment receipts, right? So if you've actually had a Tim Hortons receipt hold on to it, take a picture of it, digitize it to at least begin with, so that worst comes worst, if you do lose that, you still have a digital copy. Though I do understand that the CRA may actually ask you for some of these physical copies, which, again, that's a conversation or another day. But you do have the opportunity today, in today's day and context, to take a picture of it and have a process to digitally manage these receipts, okay? And then have them flow into a system that automatically calculates the expense, the HST or the jurisdictional tax that you paid, so that all of that ties back into your expense, your jurisdictional tax, which helps you with determining your overall profit, corporate tax liabilities, as well as any HST, GST, PST liabilities. Okay. And once you have that process in place, the final set of documents from a corporation that you have to manage, whether that's financial statements in terms of income, expense, your profit and loss, your trial balance, all of that becomes easy peasy because you've done all the right things right from scratch, because all that information is what flows into those documents, okay? Because that gives you, at the end of a term, the financial health of your business. So you don't have to wait till end of year to really recognize what that financial health was. You can, in fact, do it, if not on a weekly basis. For sure, you should consider doing it on a monthly basis. Okay. So looking at these two different aspects, revenue related to both Law Society guidelines as well as expense guidelines as well as CRA guidelines, some of the documents that I'm sure you've already heard about these documents. You've got ledgers and journals. And if you have a trust account, you of course have a trust ledger, trust journal. If you only have a general account, then you have only the general ledgers and journals to deal with. If you have both, of course, then you have those 4 documents to deal with. And then you have the reconciliation documents for both trust and general. That's required by the law societies for you to, generate these reconciliation reports. And if you, again, have trust, then you have trust and general to deal with. If you only have general, just general to deal with. Okay? And then you may also have certain financial documents that are very jurisdictional that you have to show. For example, there's a Form 9A in the province of Ontario. So every time you move money from the trust account into your general account through an electronic means, through an electronic fund transfer or online banking, then the province of Ontario requires you to fill that form that outlines the institution's, the from and to institution's name, the amount, the date, the reason, etc. Okay, for every transaction. Okay, so we've looked at client intake, we've looked at file management, then we moved on to having a better appreciation for the financial management, how right from the intake process, ensuring that the numbers, the documents, and the process and techniques are followed to manage the obligations that you have. Now we move on to the 4th professional obligation that we have drafted in this presentation, which is the business management aspect to it. This could be for existing businesses that are looking to improve, right? So either you increase the revenue or decrease the expense or both to have a better profitability for your business. And from a business management perspective, there are, of course, many aspects that you may consider. We've just looked at some of the more relative ones that are relatively new to the business and some things that you may want to keep in mind depending on the nature of where you are in the business, if you're new or if you're looking to redefine or just improve, right? So you have cloud-based software. With every aspect of this, of course, you have a risk-reward with anything in life. But of course, keeping in mind that the one reward that you do have with the advent of technology is the access to information at any given time. Okay? So And as a legal professional, you of course today have a variety of options, something that legal professionals didn't necessarily have from a software standpoint, at least even, I would say, 10 to 15 years back. So you have quite a few options. A lot of your friends and colleagues may know those options, or you can Google them with key search words that are relevant to you. Find the right, tools. I'm not a big proponent of software. Of course, software helps in many ways, but I think what's important is to find the right tool to help manage time and be efficient and be compliant. Three important aspects of a software or a tool that you may want to look into. Okay, so of course you have legal accounting software. The advantage of a software over a tool is when it comes to numbers, when it comes to crunching those financial numbers, software, especially in the cloud, have that power, and you don't have to directly pay for that power of computation in today's day and context, right? You don't have to pay for those servers. You're not paying for those IBM servers, cloud servers. You're paying a very small monthly or a annual subscription fee to be part of that. But at the same time, ensure that you have every aspect of security, the concerns that you may have with regards to security, file maintenance, backups, where it's hosted, where is the data residing, how easy is it for you to access data, how easy is it for you to transfer data over from one system to another, and of course if you won the lottery you don't have to do this anymore, then how are you able to take all the files from that system out? If you have a PC-based system, or if it's based on a desktop or a particular computer, that's fine too. Then you have to start to think about the risk and reward of that. What if my computer crashes? Do I have a backup? Or what would it cost for a product company to support and revive that data? Things of that nature. If you're doing this in a paper-based manner, what is the risk reward of calamity or fire or something like that, right? Do you have photocopies of those files in a different location? So there's of course the perceived notion of risk with anything and everything else, but it's what we want to leave you with is be fully aware of your choices you make. And if you've actually done the due diligence and you've decided on techniques and tools or software that help, stick to it, invest time in it, and be successful with it. Okay. Of course, there are certain types of tools and technologies that, of course, give you the edge in today's day and age. You want to provide services that really improves customer experience. Next week, actually, we're going to be doing a webinar on the customer experience, business experience aspects of a legal business. It really talks about how you can wow that customer through various experiences. Being able to intake clients right on your mobile phone. You just met that customer. You don't have a pen on you. You're not going to struggle with taking down that information. Scan their business card and put that right into it, right? So that's the level of sophistication tools provide you with. Ensuring that you have payment options embedded right in your invoice or your retainer letter, making it a self-serve. That's the convenience and an amazing customer service you're providing your clients with, because they're used to doing or dealing with such ease of business in other aspects of their life. So how do you maximize the day and age advent of technologies to help you to stay abreast, if not ahead of the curve? You could certainly be ahead of the curve as well. And if you do have systems that are restricted in terms of how you use them as PC-based, then you have other options of finding how you can remotely connect with that, such as your voice messages. So if you have a LAN system, you have a lot of phone systems today that provide you with voice messages via email. We at uLaw, we use a product called RingCentral. You have VoIP options like Vonage and others that may actually send you voice messages as text. They may even send you as a embedded file within your email so that you're not missing out on a voice message from a prospective client. And another new trend we're seeing is, of course, a big part of business management is location in terms of an office space. So, of course, you have the option to rent office space depending on the size of your firm and how you plan to grow that business. But if you're getting started and if you're a solo entrepreneur who's just slowly but surely starting to make her or his ground in the marketplace, then you have other options, co-sharing locations, whether that's WeWork or looking at Regus, or then you have other companies that do provide legal offices for rent or co-sharing with other legal professionals. So that's a new trend that we're starting to see. Do make it a consideration to understand more about co-locations and co-sharing of locations as you plan out to look at spaces to rent for your office. Okay, so again, that's a new trend that's happening up. You don't have to pay, the $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 rent all by yourself. You can, of course, do that through co-working spaces. And the aspect of this is ensuring that these are expenses, of course, that your businesses would have to manage and maintain. Maximizing the value out of these expenses and these investments are what you have to keep in mind. Okay. And then we move on to the professional management in terms of being a legal professional in your appropriate jurisdiction. There's, of course, expectations from the law societies in terms of how you represent the society of legal professionals. Little things as ensuring that you're completing your required continued professional development hours, both substantial and professional. So you're here in today's webinar, and of course gives you that CPD hours, so kudos and thank you at the same time. Of course, you're going to participate and be part of other CPDs to gain your knowledge, not only for the sake of getting CPDs, but also to gain that knowledge about learning something new. The Law Society does talk about, the opportunity in this space to be part of memberships of professional associations. It's a wonderful place, of course, to share common issues. It gives you a bit of that relationship with other colleagues, sharing similar problems or pain points or successes. Many times memberships can also give you membership benefits of purchasing software or purchasing legal books, access to research material, free CPDs. So being part of membership kind of gives you that part of being one with a similar-minded set of folks, if you will. So it's not a must, but it's certainly something to keep in mind and explore. Of course, from the perspective of new legislations and laws that are changing in your practice and jurisdictions, you certainly want to be abreast and stay ahead of that, whether you're constantly through these CPD sessions or through educating yourself or through other means, ensuring that you're reviewing these changes and especially abreast of case laws as well, of course. There are tools that allow you to do that in today's day and age as well. And last but not the least, of course, managing your conduct guidelines. There's a elaborate section within the bookkeeping guidelines that talks about conduct and how important it is to have that etiquette, ethics, and the guidelines that govern how you represent yourself as a legal professional, not only to the society, to the common person who's looking to hire your service and believe in the law, but also internal to the law firm, how you manage and respect and maintain relationship with your other colleagues in the business within your firm. So those are conduct guidelines, and I would, of course, highly recommend that if you haven't already read through it, to read it. You can Google it, and it's called the Law Society, and you can put the different names and just say Law Society of Ontario, Law Society of British Columbia, Conduct Guidelines. And you would get a PDF that talks about the guidelines that are recommended. Okay, the last two aspects of today's presentation with a few more minutes that we have. Believe it or not, the Law Society's bookkeeping guidelines do talk a lot about how important it is for legal professionals to appreciate time, to be mindful, I think that's the right word, to be mindful of the time spent in each and every caveat of their business, and how to maximize and do more with less. And they talk about how in this particular business, of course, there is the need to do more with less, whether that's time or money, and to first embrace that as almost a habitual behavior of this particular line of business, that it's going to be fast-paced, that it's going to be having to deal with multiple files at the same time, that it is having to deal with a lot of information and processing that information, which needs time. It's going to need a lot of time that you have to educate yourself. It's going to need a time to be in court, time to travel in between, and also, amongst all of this, find the time to enjoy what you do for a living, as well as enjoy the experience of going through that process, right? The pursuit of that legal business. And they do heavily talk about having the right, again, the techniques and tools in place so that you're well prepared to deal with the nature of the beast. And of course, we wanted to highlight things that you already know, but just to reiterate that that's the way to go. Having a to-do list and maintain it. And what we talk about is ensuring that you have a system or multiple systems that allows you to, if possible, amalgamate, at the same time demarcate both personal and professional checklists. So if you wanted to amalgamate the time so that if you have that soccer meeting to go to, that you're not signing up to meet with a new client at the time, because then you're overwhelming yourself. So that's an advantage of having a consolidated personal and professional calendar inbuilt with tasks. But at the same time, if you don't want to have to see that soccer meeting and you only want to deal with the professional time that you have, the vice versa, if you will, then you also have that option, right? So have the right tools that can kind of give you the best of both worlds. Really manage the task list. And I've personally seen of me being helping legal professionals, and through this service that we offer through uLaw, limited experience of about 10 years now, we've seen how checklists and really having a to-do list of things to do has helped a lot of our legal friends be very successful in how they pursue and how they go about their day-to-day tasks. Right from ensuring that you have the right court dates. So for certain lines of businesses such as the POA, life revolves around ensuring that you're at that court for that particular important date, to ensuring that you have tasks mentioned. And as your firm grows, now that's going to almost explode exponentially the number of tasks that now start to merge, right? So do you have to be in that courtroom along with a colleague of yours, a junior lawyer, right? Or are you going to have to be in that client intake meeting with that articulating student? So you're going to combine now other individuals. So now what happens is you need to have a calendaring or task management system that is not only for yourself, but also for this growing firm of yours. So that when you're blocking time, you're completely aware of everyone's availability. So Google Calendar, if you're using shared calendars within Google, which is free of cost, or you can actually get upgraded into a business account, that gives you that flexibility. Other calendars do too. Legal accounting softwares and practice management softwares give you that capability. Many times they also integrate with these systems so that it's all seamless within the day-to-day devices that you use. Now from specific, and this could apply to any business, right? I mean, this could be applicable to other businesses too. And it applies to the legal business as well. But then the next two aspects are something that's more aligned with the legal business. One is to, again, if time is limited and if you have to maximize the use of time, one of the areas that we've seen over a period of time that people spend a lot of time on are just navigating and searching through files. It's relevant 5 years when I said this, it's still relevant today. And the reason for that is as time goes, as the files increase, if you still don't have a technique or process, and this is something that goes beyond software. You could have a software with the features and functionalities that give you this capability, but if you're not emphasizing and you're not using that feature, then it's as good as it not being there. So it's more of a process, discipline, and a technique that you put into your practice more than a software tool to give you the focused attention to deal with active files, for example. That's just one example. When you're dealing with files, of course, you're going to deal with current files that you have to focus your attention on. There are going to be files that are done with. You don't have to necessarily put a lot of attention to that. So categorizing files and taking a similar approach of categorization of what's important now, what's important later, or what's not important at all, allows you to slice that time in a way that's more meaningful, more impactful, and very mindful. Okay? So we talk about how management of active files is a very simple example as a means of elaborating on the essence of what that means. And another thing that's very near and dear to us as we work with our legal friends in the business is in this business, of course, there are many, many good Samaritans. And whether that's situational or if that's personal or if it's just the way the firm is built is there's a lot of pro bono that's provided. Free time. And sometimes you don't capture the non-billable time. So let me rephrase that. So there's non-billable time, and that can be further divided into non-billable time provided towards your client, which is the pro bono. There could be non-billable time that you do for yourself. So educating yourself is important. Of course, being part of the CPD is a non-billable time. So this 1 hour that you spend, technically, fortunately and unfortunately, is a non-billable time. But appreciating that, why did I spend that 2 to 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon when I could have been at court or could have done other things is important because you, of course, have a reason for it. And if there's a valid, meaningful, business impactful reason for it, then it's easier for you to reconcile with. Oh, I was in this non-billable time of 2 to 3 on Friday afternoon because I was now getting a CPD and hopefully a good experience of learning something new or something that's maybe repetitive, but it's helping you put that practice in place. Likewise, dealing with pro bono. If you're actually spending a lot of time where you're actually putting the effort in, but you're not charging the client, then you have to appreciate and start to measure that so that in your next year or in your next quarter, if that's really not helping your case of running the business, then you may want to change the method of how you go about dealing with pro bono. A good example is if you're dealing with a lot of flat fees, right? But you spend, let's say your typical per hour rate is $300, or it could be $100. Let's start at that. And you got a flat fee of $565, let's say, with taxes in the province of Ontario. But let's say you end up docketing about 8 to 9 hours of effort, right, to complete that matter, then it's a combination of, you really want to demarcate whether those extra 3 hours, right, was spent as non-billable. Was it pro bono where you decided not to charge the client, or was it just an efficiency component of your firm? What could have been done in 2 hours took 4 hours, or it took 2 hours and you just did not bill the client because you didn't feel it right, or you wanted to stay competitive. Whatever the reason may be, it's important that you measure that. What's happening today is there's limited means, unless you have a good legal accounting practice management system that tracks and measures all this. And if you have to do this manually, we of course find that not many of them are doing this measurement manually. So again, another important aspect to keep in mind when you as a legal professional look at time management. Okay? And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, and I do apologize if it was definitely not music to your ears. And last but not the least, again, a big surprise for someone like myself who read this through, in terms of understanding what the Law Society's concern was about their fellow colleagues in the business. They talk about personal management. They talk about how important it is in this very stressful habitat for legal professionals to be satisfied and have fun. They talk about how there's a sense of happiness that needs to resonate of running this business. Going back to, for you to understand that, when you first get started, of course, you're excited about being certified and licensed to be a legal professional, paralegal lawyer. There was a certain dream. There's, of course, we got to run our lives, so hence we need money. So there's many motivational factors to it. But once you get into the motion of things, what we've done, what we've seen, and what we've heard and surveyed, there is in any business, and more importantly in the legal business, a point of achieving a bit of flat mode, right? So you have this curve where you're really excited and you're going up this curve, and you hit this bit of slack and bit of flatness, or just sustaining. And that's the period when you're kind of lull, you're not motivated enough, and that's when you start to make the subtle mistakes of not measuring, not being mindful of what's happening around you. You're just going with the flow. So the Law Society talks about how if you build that as a discipline, regardless of how things are going around, you would still be very cognizant of what is happening around you. Okay? So measuring the areas of practice. A good example is you can use the legal accounting practice management tools today that gives you revenue based on areas of practice. It tells you expenses based on areas of practice. So if a certain area of practice is really not giving you the kind of satisfaction, at the same time not giving you the kind of revenue that you expected, maybe a action plan is to reconsider other areas of practice, either through education. So you certainly move from being a small claims paralegal to an immigration consultant, or you could be a lawyer who's dealing with family law, but also wanting to educate yourself to deal with other types of law, right? So tracking, recording, of course, tracking and measuring also helps with how it comes back to help with personal management, okay? So that gives you and helps you plan for and take corrective actions to be satisfied and happy through that progress and through the growth of your business. And of course, in all doing this, Law Society does talk about planning and ensuring that you're having days off and taking the vacation with family and friends so that you can appreciate life outside of your business. And they certainly feel in this very stressful habitat, having that balance of work life and working towards achieving that is going to help manage that stress. So from an overall standpoint of today's webinar, those were the 7 major aspects that we want to talk about as we cover practice management and how these tools can help you across all these different obligations that you have. So our highlight was to talk about these obligations and then hopefully leave you with some insight into tools and techniques and methodologies that you may want to consider to help you achieve these obligations. Okay? So with that, I'll wrap up today's webinar. Again, reiterating that this webinar is being recorded, will be available for you to consume as a recorded YouTube webinar in our YouTube channel as early as next week. It's for CPD professionalism credits, and our webinar for next week, which I bring up here, is about the BX, CX, UX, and PX experience, just the business, customer, user, and product experience. And that's also for 1 hour of CPD credits. Okay? Well, with that being said, I want to thank everyone who's joined me today. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you in our next webinar next week. Thank you very much.